The coffee mug slipped from William Thompson's weathered fingers, ceramic shattering against the trailer's linoleum floor as the searing pain in his back erupted like molten metal spreading through his spine. 72 years old, and he'd never felt agony quite like this. Not even during 3 tours in Vietnam. What he discovered protruding from his lower back wasn't just another symptom of old age. Emma's scream pierced the December night as her nursing-trained eyes took in the grotesque, hardened mass beneath her father's flannel shirt. The thing that had been growing there unnoticed for God knew how long. Her hands trembled as she dialed 911, the phone slick with sweat despite the Minnesota blizzard raging outside. Bill remembered that metallic taste flooding his mouth, the same taste from 1968 when they gave him those special vaccinations, the same taste that haunted his nightmares for 50 years. "Get me to the hospital," he gasped, clutching the wall for support. William Bill Thompson had once been the pride of Millerville High. Quarterback who could thread a football through a tire swing at 50 yards, the boy every father wanted as a son-in-law. That was before Uncle Sam called his number in 1967, before the jungles of Vietnam swallowed 3 years of his life and spit him back out broken in ways that didn't show on the outside. Now, 57 years later, he lived alone in a rusted, single-wide trailer at the edge of town, surviving on $847 a month in disability payments, and the kind of stubborn pride that kept him from asking his daughter Emma for help. The back pain had been his constant companion since 1970. Doctors at the VA hospital dismissed it as typical combat stress and degenerative disc disease, prescribing pills that dulled the edges but never touched the core of his agony. Emma Thompson Rodriguez, 45 and fierce as her Irish grandmother, worked 12-hour shifts as a registered nurse at Minneapolis General, raising 2 teenagers after her divorce from a man who couldn't handle being married to someone stronger than him. She visited her father twice a year, Christmas and his birthday, out of duty more than affection. The emotional distance between them stretched back decades, to the day he returned from Southeast Asia speaking in monosyllables and flinching at car backfires. "He came back different," her mother used to say before the cancer took her 10 years ago. "The war took our Billy and sent us back a stranger." The trailer sat on 3 acres of scrubland outside Millerville, Minnesota, population 847. The same number as Bill's monthly check, a coincidence that felt like cosmic mockery. His nearest neighbor was Martha Henderson, 78, a widow whose husband had served in Korea. Martha still brought him casseroles twice a week and checked on him during the brutal Minnesota winters, understanding the particular loneliness that comes with loving someone who came home from war in body, but not in spirit. Bill's days followed the same pattern. Wake up at 500 hours out of habit, swallow 3 Percocet with black coffee, sit in his recliner watching morning news until the pills kicked in enough for him to function. The trailer was sparse, military neat but worn down like everything else in his life. A faded American flag hung in the window, and his bronze star sat in a drawer, wrapped in tissue paper he hadn't disturbed in 20 years. The pain in his back had been getting worse lately, spreading down his legs and up his spine like fire ants marching in formation. Some nights he couldn't sleep at all, pacing the narrow hallway between his bedroom and kitchen, pressing his palms against the walls for support. He'd stopped mentioning it to the VA doctors. They'd just adjust his medication again and send him home with pamphlets about aging gracefully. But this Christmas Eve morning, something was different. The pain wasn't just burning, it was throbbing, pulsing like a second heartbeat lodged beneath his shoulder blade, and there was that taste again, metallic and familiar, coating his tongue like old pennies. Emma's Honda Civic skidded on the icy gravel as she pulled into her father's driveway at 6 in the morning on Christmas Eve. She hadn't planned to come this early, but something in his voice during their brief phone call the night before, a tremor she'd never heard before, made her abandon her original plan to arrive after lunch. The blizzard had been pounding Minnesota for 18 hours straight, and the Weather Service was calling it the worst storm in 4 decades. She found him collapsed on the kitchen floor, conscious but unable to move, his face gray as the winter sky outside. "Dad!" She dropped to her knees beside him, her nursing training immediately taking over. His pulse was rapid and thready, skin clammy with sweat despite the trailer's bone-deep cold. "Can't get up, Em," he whispered, using the childhood nickname he hadn't spoken in years. "Back's on fire." "Been like this since midnight." As she helped him to his feet, her hand brushed against something that made her freeze. Through his thin flannel shirt, she felt a hard, raised mass on his lower back, roughly the size of a golf ball. It wasn't soft like muscle or fat. It felt solid, almost crystalline, and it radiated heat like an infection. "Dad, how long has this been here?" She pressed gently, feeling the edges of the growth. It was perfectly round, sitting just above his left kidney. "What?" Bill tried to twist around, wincing. "What are you talking about?" "This lump. It's huge. How did you not notice this?" Bill's face went blank. It's been sore there, but I thought it was just the usual." He trailed off, confusion clouding his eyes. "You mean there's something there I can see?" Emma's stomach dropped. In 15 years of nursing, she'd felt enough tumors and cysts to know this was neither. This felt manufactured, artificial. "We're going to the hospital." "Right now." "Emma, no. You know I can't afford. I don't care what it costs." She was already grabbing her keys, her mind racing through possibilities. "Dad, I'm a nurse. This isn't normal." The drive to Millerville General took 25 minutes through snow-packed roads that should have been impassable. Emma white-knuckled the steering wheel while Bill groaned in the passenger seat, each bump sending shock waves through his spine. She kept glancing at him, noticing details she'd missed during her hurried visits, the way he favored his left side, how his hands shook even when he wasn't moving, the deep lines carved around his eyes from decades of hidden pain. "Why didn't you tell me it was getting worse?" she asked as they pulled into the emergency room parking lot. "Tell you what? That your old man's falling apart? You've got your own life, Em. Your kids, your job. Last thing you need is me whining about aches and pains, doctor." Kevin Mitchell, the attending physician, was younger than Emma and had the harried look of someone pulling a Christmas Eve shift. He examined Bill with the perfunctory efficiency of a man who'd seen too many elderly patients with vague complaints. When Emma pointed out the mass on her father's back, Mitchell palpated it briefly and shrugged. "Feels like a lipoma to me. Fatty tissue buildup. Very common in men his age, especially veterans. Probably been developing for years." He was already reaching for his prescription pad. "I can refer you to a plastic surgeon if it's cosmetically concerning, but these are almost always benign." "Doctor, with respect, I'm a registered nurse and this doesn't feel like any lipoma I've encountered." Emma's voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent years advocating for patients. "It's completely solid and it's generating heat. That's not normal for fatty tissue." Mitchell looked annoyed. "Mrs. Rodriguez. And I'm telling you, this needs imaging." "Ma'am, it's Christmas Eve. Imaging is for emergencies. Your father is stable, his vitals are normal, and what you're describing is a common, benign condition." He handed Bill a prescription. "Increase his pain medication, apply ice, follow up with his primary care physician next week." Emma felt her Irish temper flaring, but before she could argue further, an elderly woman's voice cut through the tension. "Excuse me, are you Bill Thompson?" They turned to see Martha Henderson pushing through the emergency room doors, snow covering her wool coat. At 78, she moved with the determined gait of someone who'd survived the Depression, World War II, and 50 years of Minnesota winters. "Martha, What are you doing here? Bill tried to sit up straighter. Saw your lights were on all night, then saw Emma's car. Figured something was wrong. She studied his face with sharp blue eyes. How bad is the pain, Billy? It's different this time, Martha. Worse than it's ever been. Martha nodded grimly. My Harold had something similar. Right before he died. Martha's words hung in the emergency room air like a death sentence. Emma watched her father's face drain of what little color remained as the old woman continued, her voice steady but grim. Harold never told me the whole story, but near the end, when the morphine made him talk, he said things about experiments, about shots they gave the boys that weren't in any medical records. Martha's weathered hands gripped her purse tighter. He had a lump just like that, Bill. Same spot, same size. The VA doctors told us it was nothing too. Dr. Mitchell shifted uncomfortably. Ma'am, I'm sure there's a simple explanation. Doctor, Emma interrupted, her voice steel-edged. What did Harold Henderson die of? Martha's eyes never left Bill's face. Officially, sudden cardiac arrest during routine surgery to remove a benign fatty tumor. But the surgeon who operated, Dr. Kellerman, he called me 3 days later, drunk as a skunk, crying into the phone. Said what they took out of Harold wasn't any tumor he'd ever seen. Bill's hands began to shake. Martha, what are you saying? I'm saying my Harold served in Korea from 52 to 54, came home with back pain that never stopped, just like you. And when they finally cut him open in 1987, Dr. Kellerman said what came out looked like it had wires in it. The emergency room suddenly felt too small, too bright. Emma's nursing instinct screamed that something was terribly wrong, but not with her father's health, with the entire situation. Dad, we need a CT scan today. Insurance won't cover imaging for a lipoma, Dr. Mitchell said firmly. And honestly, I think you're all letting imagination run wild here. Then we'll pay cash. Emma was already pulling out her phone, calculating credit card limits and calling in favors. Martha, can you stay with him while I make some calls? 20 minutes later, Emma had secured an emergency CT appointment at the VA hospital 40 miles away. Dr. Margaret O'Brien, the chief radiologist, had agreed to come in on Christmas Eve after Emma explained the urgency. The drive through the blizzard was harrowing, but Emma's determination burned hotter than the storm's fury. Em, you don't have to do this, Bill said as they pulled into the VA parking lot. It's probably nothing. That old woman's just got you spooked. Dad, in 15 years of nursing, I've learned to trust my instincts. And right now, every instinct I have is screaming that something's wrong. She helped him out of the car, noting how his legs nearly buckled. When did you last have a good day? A day without pain? Bill considered this as they walked slowly toward the entrance. I can't remember. Maybe 1969, before I shipped out for my second tour. Dr. O'Brien was waiting for them, a compact woman with graying red hair and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd spent decades reading X-rays of broken soldiers. Mr. Thompson, let's get you comfortable and see what we're dealing with. The CT scan took 30 minutes. Emma sat in the waiting room watching snow pile against the windows while her father underwent imaging. She tried calling her ex-husband to explain why she wouldn't be bringing the kids to his place for Christmas Eve dinner, but the call went straight to voicemail. Her teenage son Jake had texted asking when she'd be back. She had no answer. When Dr. O'Brien emerged from the imaging suite, her face was pale. Mrs. Rodriguez, I need to speak with you privately. They stepped into a small office lined with medical texts and family photos. Dr. O'Brien closed the door carefully before speaking. Your father has a foreign object embedded in his lumbar spine. It's been there for decades, based on the tissue growth around it. She pulled up the scan on her computer screen, pointing to a white mass that stood out starkly against the bone and soft tissue. This isn't shrapnel, and it's not a tumor, it's manufactured. Emma stared at the image. The object was perfectly cylindrical, about 2 centimeters long, with what appeared to be small components attached to its surface. What kind of manufactured? I've been reading military scans for 23 years, and I've never seen anything like this. It appears to be some kind of medical device, but there's no record in your father's military medical history of any surgical implants. Could it be some kind of experimental treatment, something they did for his back pain? Dr. O'Brien's expression grew troubled. Mrs. Rodriguez, the tissue growth pattern suggests this object has been there since approximately 1968 or 1969. But here's what's really concerning. It appears to still be active. Active? What do you mean, active? There's unusual electromagnetic activity around the device. It's generating some kind of signal. Doctor. O'Brien pulled up another screen showing wave-like patterns. I've contacted our Chief of Staff, and he's insisting we notify the Department of Defense immediately. Emma felt the world tilting. The Department of Defense? Why would they? Because, Mrs. Rodriguez, whatever's in your father's back appears to be military technology that was implanted without his knowledge or consent, and based on the scan results, it's been transmitting data for over 50 years. Through the office window, Emma could see her father sitting in the recovery area, looking small and vulnerable in the hospital gown. For the first time in decades, she wanted nothing more than to protect him from whatever storm was coming. Doctor, who else knows about this? Right now, just you, me, and the technician who ran the scan. But I'm required by federal law to report this within the hour. Emma's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Do not discuss scan results with anyone. We'll be in touch soon. Emma stared at the text message, her hands trembling as she showed the screen to Dr. O'Brien. The radiologist's face went ashen as she read the words, and she immediately locked her computer terminal. Mrs. Rodriguez, I think we need to get your father out of here. Now. Dr. O'Brien was already moving toward the door. In 30 years of medicine, I've never received a message like that, and I don't like how fast whoever sent it knew about our scan. They hurried back to the recovery area where Bill sat hunched forward, still wearing the hospital gown. His color had improved slightly, but Emma could see the confusion and fear in his eyes as they approached. What's wrong? He asked, reading their expressions. You both look like you've seen a ghost. Dad, we need to leave. Right now. Emma helped him back into his clothes while Dr. O'Brien kept watch at the door. I'll explain everything in the car, but we can't stay here. The scan. What did it show? Bill's voice was weak, but Emma heard the soldier underneath, the man who'd faced enemy fire and lived to tell about it. Dr. O'Brien handed Emma a USB drive. Everything's on here. The scans, my initial analysis, everything. Keep it safe. She paused, seeming to wrestle with something. Mr. Thompson, my father served in Korea. Whatever they did to you, whatever this is about, you deserve answers. The drive back to Bill's trailer took place in tense silence, broken only by the rhythmic thump of windshield wipers fighting the snow. Emma's mind raced through possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. When they finally pulled into the driveway, Martha's kitchen light was on, and she was waiting for them with hot coffee and the grim determination of someone who'd been expecting this moment for decades. Well? Martha asked as they settled around Bill's small kitchen table. Emma pulled out her laptop and inserted the USB drive. The CT scans filled the screen, showing the mysterious object embedded in her father's spine with stark clarity. Martha studied the images, her face grave. That's exactly what Dr. Kellerman described, she said quietly. Harold's looked just like that. Bill leaned forward, seeing the foreign object in his own body for the first time. Jesus Christ. How long has that been in there? Based on the tissue growth, probably since Vietnam, Emma said. Dad, do you remember anything unusual? Any medical procedures, shots, anything that wasn't standard? Bill closed his eyes, his weathered face creasing with concentration. There was something. Late 1968, maybe early 69, they called us in for special vaccinations. Said it was for a new kind of malaria they'd discovered in the northern provinces. His eyes opened, suddenly alert. They separated us into groups. Only certain guys got the shots. They said we were, what was the word? Candidates. Candidates for what? Martha asked. They never said, just that we'd been selected for enhanced protection, made it sound like we were getting the best care the military had to offer. Bill's voice grew bitter. Afterward, some of the guys complained about soreness, headaches. But hell, we were in a war zone. Everyone was sore and tired. Emma's phone rang, showing a local number she didn't recognize. Against her better judgment, she answered. Mrs. Rodriguez? The voice was crisp, military. This is Colonel James Patterson with the Department of Defense. I understand you've had some concerning medical findings regarding your father. How did you get this number? Ma'am, I'm calling to arrange a meeting. There are some things we need to discuss about your father's service record and his current medical situation. Emma looked at her father and Martha, both watching her intently. What kind of things? The kind that are better discussed in person. I can be at your father's residence in 2 hours with a medical team that specializes in cases like his. Cases like his? How many cases like his are there? There was a pause. Mrs. Rodriguez, your father served his country with distinction. We want to help him, but we need your cooperation and discretion. Discretion about what? About the fact that you put something in my father's body without his knowledge? Ma'am, I think there's been a misunderstanding. These were legitimate medical procedures designed to protect our soldiers. Unfortunately, some of the paperwork from that era has been lost or classified, which is why there's no record in your father's file. Emma felt her anger rising. Lost or classified? My father has been in chronic pain for 50 years because of whatever you did to him, which is why we're offering immediate assistance. Full medical coverage, pain management, even compensation for his suffering. All we ask is that you allow our medical team to examine him and sign some routine paperwork. What kind of paperwork? Standard non-disclosure agreements. For national security purposes, you understand. Emma looked at her father, seeing him truly for the first time in years. Not the distant, grumpy old man she'd resented for his emotional unavailability, but a victim of something beyond his control. A man who'd served his country and been betrayed by it in the most intimate way possible. Colonel Patterson, let me ask you something. How did you know about the CT scan? Another pause. We have protocols in place for situations like this. Situations where you're caught experimenting on American soldiers? Mrs. Rodriguez, I think you're mischaracterizing. No, I think I'm finally understanding. Emma's voice was steel. How many others are there? How many other veterans are walking around with these things in their bodies? Ma'am, I really think we should continue this conversation in person. I think we should continue it with my lawyer present, and maybe some reporters. The line went quiet for several seconds. When Colonel Patterson spoke again, his tone had changed, becoming more formal and significantly colder. Mrs. Rodriguez, I want to be very clear about something. Your father receives disability benefits and medical care through the VA system. These benefits can be reviewed and adjusted based on various factors, including cooperation with ongoing national security matters. The threat was unmistakable. Emma felt Martha's hand on her shoulder, offering silent support. Are you threatening to take away my father's benefits if we don't keep quiet? I'm simply explaining how the system works. Your father has dedicated his life to serving this country. I'd hate to see that service record complicated by unnecessary controversy. Emma hung up the phone and immediately called her friend Sarah Williams, an investigative journalist with the Washington Post. While the phone rang, she looked at her father and Martha. Dad, I need you to tell me everything you remember about those shots, every detail, no matter how small. Bill nodded, suddenly looking more alert than he had in years. Em, if they're threatening us, that means we're onto something big, doesn't it? Yes, Dad. I think it does. Martha reached across the table and squeezed Bill's hand. Harold always said the truth would come out eventually. Maybe it's finally time. Sarah Williams arrived at Bill's trailer at 10 o'clock that night, driving through the blizzard in a rented SUV with chains on the tires. Emma had known Sarah since nursing school. They'd been roommates for 2 years before Sarah switched to journalism, driven by an insatiable need to uncover truth wherever it hid. Now, at 43, Sarah was one of the Washington Post's most respected investigative reporters, specializing in military and government accountability stories. "Show me everything," Sarah said without preamble, settling at the kitchen table with her laptop and recording equipment. Emma pulled up the CT scans while Bill sat rigidly upright, the soldier in him responding to the gravity of the situation. "This is just the beginning," Sarah said after studying the images. "Emma, you said there was a Colonel Patterson who called you?" "Threatened us, more like," Emma replied. "Basically said Dad's benefits would disappear if we didn't cooperate and keep quiet." Sarah's fingers flew across her keyboard. "James Patterson, current Pentagon liaison for Veteran Affairs, former Army Medical Corps. And here's something interesting. He was stationed at Fort Detrick from 1967 to 1971. She looked up grimly. Fort Detrick was the center of military medical research during Vietnam. If there was human experimentation happening, it would have been coordinated from there. Human experimentation? Bill's voice cracked. They were experimenting on us? Dad, that device in your back isn't medical equipment from the 1960s, Emma said gently. According to Dr. O'Brien, it's still active, still transmitting. They've been monitoring you for 50 years. Bill stood up abruptly, pacing to the window despite the pain shooting through his back. Monitoring me for what? I'm nobody. I came home, worked construction for 30 years, raised my daughter. What could they possibly want to know? Sarah pulled up another screen. I've been researching similar cases since Emma called. In the past 6 months, I've found 47 other Vietnam veterans who've reported mysterious lumps, chronic pain, and suspicious medical responses from the VA system. She showed them a map with red dots scattered across the country. All of them served between 1967 and 1970. All of them received special vaccinations, and 12 of them have died during routine surgeries to remove what doctors called benign tumors. Martha gasped. 12? Harold was one of 12? Harold Henderson died February 15, 1987, during surgery at Minneapolis VA Medical Center. Official cause of death, surgical complications. Sarah's voice was clinical, but her eyes burned with anger. The surgeon, Dr. Kellerman, had a nervous breakdown 3 weeks later and was quietly transferred to a civilian hospital. He died in 2003, but not before writing several letters to veteran advocacy groups claiming he'd been forced to participate in a cover-up. Emma felt sick. What did the letters say? That what they removed from these veterans weren't tumors at all. They were sophisticated monitoring devices, implanted without consent during the war. And when the devices started failing after 20 years, the government had them surgically removed and the patients eliminated to prevent exposure. Bill slumped back into his chair. They killed Harold to keep him quiet. The evidence suggests it, Sarah said. But here's where it gets interesting. The devices started failing in the mid-1980s. That's when the deaths began. But yours, Mr. Thompson, appears to still be functional. That makes you incredibly valuable to this story, and incredibly dangerous to whoever's behind this. Emma's phone buzzed with another text. Last warning. Accept our offer or face the consequences. Sarah photographed the message. They're watching us, probably listening too. She stood up and began unplugging electrical devices around the trailer. "We need to move fast. Emma, I want you to take your father to somewhere safe while I start making calls. I have sources at the Pentagon, people who might be willing to talk off the record." "Where can we go that they won't find us?" Emma asked. Martha spoke up. "My nephew runs a hunting lodge up near the Canadian border. Off the grid, no cell service, no internet. If you need to disappear for a few days, that's your best bet." Bill shook his head stubbornly. "I'm not running. I've been running from the truth for 50 years, and look where it got me. If they want a fight, they can have one." "Dad, you're in no condition to fight anyone." "Maybe not physically, but I've got something they don't want me to have. The truth. And a daughter who's too damn stubborn to let them bury it." Bill's eyes had cleared, and for the first time in years, Emma saw the Marine who'd survived 3 tours of combat. "What do you need me to do?" Sarah smiled grimly. "I need you to go on record. Full interview, everything you remember about those injections, the aftermath, the years of pain and medical gaslighting. I need documentation that can't be suppressed or explained away." For the next 3 hours, Sarah conducted a thorough interview while Emma provided medical context and Martha filled in details about Harold's experience. Bill's memory, freed from decades of suppression and pain medication fog, proved remarkably sharp. He remembered names, dates, specific conversations with medical personnel who'd administered the shots. "There was a doctor," Bill said, his forehead creased with concentration. "Army doctor, real young guy, looked scared out of his mind. He pulled me aside after the injection and said something strange." "What did he say?" Sarah leaned forward. "He said, 'Son, if you ever have problems down the road, problems the VA can't explain, you find Dr. Patricia Wells at Johns Hopkins. She'll know what to do.'" Bill looked up suddenly. "I never understood what he meant, but I never forgot the name." Sarah was already typing. "Dr. Patricia Wells, Johns Hopkins, here she is. Retired professor of biomedical engineering, specializes in implantable medical devices. She's 79 years old, still lives in Baltimore." "Call her," Emma said. "If she's the key to understanding this, we need to reach her before they do." At 3 a.m., Sarah made contact with Dr. Wells, who agreed to meet them the following day but insisted on extreme security precautions. "She sounded terrified," Sarah reported. "But she also sounded like she's been waiting for this call for 50 years. As dawn broke over the snow-covered Minnesota landscape, Emma helped her father pack a small bag. They were driving to Baltimore to meet the woman who might hold the key to 5 decades of lies. Bill moved slowly, but with purpose, the pain in his back seeming less important than the mission ahead. "Em," he said as they prepared to leave, "I want you to know something. All those years I was distant. All those times I couldn't be the father you deserved. It wasn't because I didn't love you. It was because something inside me was broken, and I didn't know how to fix it." Emma hugged him carefully, mindful of his injured back. "Dad, we're going to fix it now. All of it." Martha stood in the doorway, watching them load the car. "You bring that old fool back in one piece," she called to Emma. "I've got a pot roast waiting for Sunday dinner." As they drove away through the morning snow, Emma caught sight of a black sedan parked at the end of the road, its occupants watching their departure with professional interest. The race for truth had begun. The drive to Baltimore became a nightmare of federal interference and escalating medical crisis. They'd made it as far as Chicago when Bill collapsed in a gas station restroom, his legs giving out completely as waves of paralysis crept up his spine. Emma found him on the floor, conscious but unable to move anything below his waist. "It's happening faster now," he whispered as she called 911. "Whatever that thing is doing to me, it's getting worse." At Northwestern Memorial Hospital, the emergency room physician, Dr. Michael Chen, took one look at the CT scans Sarah had forwarded and immediately called for a neurosurgical consultation. "Mr. Thompson, you have severe spinal cord compression. Without immediate surgery, you'll be permanently paralyzed within 72 hours. But when Dr. Chen tried to schedule the operation, the hospital's administration suddenly intervened. "I'm sorry," the chief of staff told them, appearing within minutes of the surgical request. "Due to complications with Mr. Thompson's veteran status and insurance authorization, we cannot proceed with surgery at this time." Emma stared at him in disbelief. "He's going to be paralyzed. This is a medical emergency." "Ma'am, I understand your concern, but there are federal protocols that must be followed. The Department of Veterans Affairs has placed a hold on any surgical intervention pending review of his case." Sarah, who had been making frantic phone calls in the corridor, returned with grim news. "They've frozen his VA benefits completely. As of this morning, Bill Thompson officially doesn't exist in the veteran database." Bill lay in the hospital bed, feeling sensation gradually disappearing from his lower body, watching his daughter fight battles he should have fought decades ago. Honey, maybe it's time to accept that offer. Take their money, sign their papers. At least you and the kids would be taken care of." "Dad, don't you dare give up on me now." Emma's voice broke. "We're so close to the truth." Dr. Patricia Wells called at midnight. Her voice was elderly but sharp with urgency. "I saw the news reports about your father. They're moving faster than I expected. You need to get him to my laboratory immediately. Doctor, he can't travel. He's paralyzed from the waist down." "Mrs. Rodriguez, I helped design those devices 55 years ago. I know exactly what's happening to your father and I know how to stop it. But if you don't get him here within 48 hours, the paralysis will become irreversible." Against medical advice and hospital policy, Emma signed her father out AMA, against medical advice. Sarah had arranged for a private ambulance, paid for by the Washington Post, to transport Bill to Johns Hopkins. As they loaded him into the vehicle, Colonel Patterson appeared with 2 federal marshals. "Mrs. Rodriguez, you're making a serious mistake," Patterson said, his polished military bearing unable to mask his desperation. "Your father needs proper medical care, not whatever quack treatment you're pursuing." "The proper medical care that your people have been denying him for 50 years? Emma's exhaustion had burned away into pure fury. "The proper care that killed Harold Henderson and 12 other veterans? I don't know what conspiracy theories you've been reading, but—" "I know about Operation Lifeline," Sarah interrupted, stepping out from behind the ambulance with her camera rolling. "I know about the non-consensual human experimentation. I know about the cover-up murders. And I know you're about to be exposed on the front page of tomorrow's Washington Post." Patterson's composure cracked. "You have no idea what you're interfering with. These men volunteered for experimental treatment to save their lives. The technology we developed has saved thousands of soldiers." "Volunteered?" Bill's voice was weak but carried across the parking lot. "Colonel, I never volunteered for anything except to serve my country. You people turned me into a lab rat without my knowledge or consent. Mr. Thompson, the medical techniques we pioneered have revolutionized battlefield medicine. Your sacrifice, my sacrifice." Bill struggled to sit up in the ambulance stretcher. "You want to talk about sacrifice? I sacrificed 3 years of my life fighting for this country. I sacrificed my health, my peace of mind, my relationship with my daughter. But I never sacrificed my right to know what you were doing to my body." Dr. Wells's laboratory at Johns Hopkins looked more like a museum than a working medical facility. At 79, she moved with the careful precision of someone whose hands had built revolutionary medical devices and whose conscience had been haunted by their misuse for half a century. "I left the military research program in 1971, she explained as her assistants prepared Bill for examination. "I couldn't stomach what they were doing with my work. The original devices were designed to monitor soldier health in real time, to provide early warning of infection, injury, or psychological trauma. But they changed the program, Sarah prompted, her recorder capturing every word. They weaponized it. By 1969, the devices weren't just monitoring, they were influencing. Hormone regulation, pain sensitivity, even psychological responses. They were trying to create the perfect soldier, one who could be controlled remotely. Emma watched the monitors as Dr. Wells' equipment analyzed the device in her father's spine. Is that why he's been in pain for 50 years? Because they were experimenting on him? The pain was a side effect they considered acceptable. But what they didn't anticipate was device degradation. After 40 years, the biocompatible coating starts breaking down, causing inflammation and nerve damage. That's what's paralyzing your father now. Bill's voice was barely a whisper. Can you remove it? Dr. Wells hesitated. Mr. Thompson, the surgery is extremely dangerous. The device has been integrated into your spinal column for over 50 years. There's a 70% chance you won't survive the operation. And if you don't remove it, 100% chance of complete paralysis within 24 hours, followed by organ failure within a week. Emma took her father's hand. Dad, it's your choice. Bill closed his eyes, and for a moment he was 22 again, stepping off a helicopter into the jungles of Vietnam, ready to serve his country with honor and courage. Doctor, he said, opening his eyes with newfound determination, let's finish what we started. The surgery began at dawn on December 30th, with Sarah live streaming the operation to prevent any government interference or cover-up attempts. Within hours, the video had been viewed by over 2 million people, with hashtag Operation Lifeline trending worldwide as viewers watched Dr. Wells carefully expose the device that had tormented Bill Thompson for 5 decades. What they found exceeded even Dr. Wells' worst fears. The device had grown into Bill's spinal cord like a metallic cancer, its tendrils wrapped around nerve bundles and integrated into bone tissue. As Dr. Wells began the painstaking process of extraction, Bill's vital signs fluctuated wildly. The integration is far more extensive than I anticipated, Dr. Wells murmured to her surgical team, her voice picked up by the live stream microphones. It's almost as if the device was designed to become permanently embedded. Emma stood in the observation gallery, watching her father's life hang in the balance while fielding calls from news organizations around the world. The story had exploded beyond anything Sarah had anticipated. Veterans organizations were demanding congressional hearings. International human rights groups were calling for investigations, and the Department of Defense had gone completely silent. 3 hours into the surgery, Bill flatlined. The monitors shrieked as his heart stopped, and Emma watched in horror as the surgical team began CPR. For 6 minutes that felt like eternity, her father was clinically dead while Dr. Wells continued working to extract the device. Got it, Dr. Wells announced as Bill's heart rhythm returned. In her forceps, she held a cylindrical object about the size of a hearing aid battery, its surface corroded and stained with tissue. 55 years of government lies right here in my hand. But their victory was short-lived. As Bill was moved to recovery, still unconscious and on a ventilator, Dr. Wells made a discovery that changed everything. The device wasn't just a monitoring system, it contained a data storage unit that had been recording and transmitting information about Bill's location, vital signs, and even brain activity for half a century. They've been watching him every moment of every day since 1968, Dr. Wells told Emma and Sarah privately. Every conversation, every emotion, every physical response. This isn't just medical experimentation. It's the most comprehensive surveillance program in human history. Sarah's investigation had uncovered the horrifying scope of Operation Lifeline. Over 12,000 soldiers had been implanted with similar devices between 1967 and 1970. The program had been designed to create a generation of veterans who could be monitored and controlled long after their military service ended. When the devices began failing in the 1980s, the government had systematically eliminated the evidence and the witnesses. Harold Henderson wasn't the first to die, Sarah reported grimly. I've documented 847 suspicious deaths among Operation Lifeline subjects over the past 40 years. Heart attacks during routine surgeries, sudden strokes, mysterious accidents. They've been murdering these men to keep their secret. Emma's phone rang constantly with threats and offers. Colonel Patterson called every hour, his desperation increasingly obvious. Mrs. Rodriguez, your father's surgery was unauthorized and illegal. If he dies, you'll be held responsible for his death. If he dies, it'll be because of what you people did to him 50 years ago, Emma shot back. And the whole world is watching now. You can't make this disappear. But the government had other plans. At 2 a.m. on December 31st, federal agents attempted to storm Johns Hopkins Hospital to seize Bill and confiscate the extracted device. They were met by hundreds of veterans who had driven through the night from across the country, forming a human wall around the hospital. Martha Henderson, now 88 and using a walker, had somehow made the journey from Minnesota. They killed my Harold, she told the gathering crowd of veterans and supporters, but they're not going to kill Billy Thompson, not while I have breath in my body. The standoff continued for 18 hours. Bill remained unconscious, his condition critical but stable. Emma hadn't slept in 3 days, surviving on coffee and determination as she coordinated with lawyers, journalists, and veteran advocacy groups. The extracted device had been secured in a laboratory safe, its secrets waiting to be fully decoded. Dr. Wells worked around the clock to analyze the device's data storage. What she found was even more devastating than they'd imagined. The program wasn't just about monitoring, she explained to a hushed crowd of reporters. They were testing behavioral modification techniques, pain induction, mood alteration, even memory suppression. These men were turned into unwitting test subjects for mind control technology. The data showed that Bill's chronic pain hadn't been a side effect. It had been deliberately induced at varying levels to test his psychological responses. His emotional distance from Emma, his inability to form close relationships, his decades of depression and isolation, all of it had been artificially created by the device in his spine. They stole 50 years of his life, Emma whispered, tears streaming down her face as she read the technical reports. They destroyed our family on purpose just to see what would happen. Sarah's story broke on the front page of the Washington Post on New Year's Eve, with simultaneous coverage by every major news organization worldwide. The headline read, Operation Lifeline, Government Conducted 50-Year Surveillance and Mind Control Experiment on 12,000 Veterans. The public reaction was immediate and explosive. Protests erupted outside the Pentagon and VA hospitals across the country. Veterans who had suffered decades of unexplained pain and psychological problems suddenly understood the truth about their conditions. Families of the 847 documented victims demanded justice for their murdered loved ones. In Congress, both parties called for immediate investigations. Senator Elizabeth Warren announced hearings to begin within the week. International allies expressed shock and condemnation of American human experimentation. The United Nations called for an immediate investigation into crimes against humanity. But the government's most desperate move came on New Year's Day. Colonel Patterson, now revealed as one of Operation Lifeline's principal architects, attempted to have Bill declared mentally incompetent and made a ward of the state. The legal maneuver would have allowed the military to seize custody of him and suppress all evidence of the program. The effort failed spectacularly when Bill woke up. "Where's my daughter?" were his first words, spoken clearly and with strength that surprised everyone. The surgery had been successful beyond Dr. Wells' most optimistic projections. Not only had the device been removed, but Bill's chronic pain, the constant companion of 50 years, was completely gone. "Dad!" Emma rushed to his bedside, hardly believing what she was seeing. For the first time since she was a child, her father's face was relaxed, free from the permanent tension lines that pain had carved into his features. "Em, honey, I feel like myself again." Bill struggled to sit up, marveling at the absence of pain that had defined his existence for half a century. "It's like waking up from a nightmare that lasted 50 years. Dr. Wells examined him with wonder. "Mr. Thompson, how do you feel mentally? Emotionally?" Bill considered the question carefully. "Clear. For the first time since Vietnam, my head feels clear, like there was fog in my brain that I didn't even know was there, and now it's gone." He looked at Emma with tears in his eyes. "Sweetheart, I'm so sorry. All those years I couldn't be the father you needed. It wasn't really me. Something was controlling me, making me feel disconnected from everything I loved." Emma took his hand, feeling the warmth and strength that had been absent for decades. "Dad, you don't need to apologize. You were a victim. We all were." Outside the hospital, the crowd of supporters had grown to thousands. Veterans, family members, and citizens who believed in justice stood together demanding accountability. The government's secret was out, and there was no putting it back. But as Bill celebrated his recovery and the Thompson family began to heal from 50 years of artificial damage, Dr. Wells made one final chilling discovery in the device's memory banks. "Mr. Thompson," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something about the other 11,999 devices that are still out there." The revelation that nearly 12,000 other veterans were still carrying active devices sent shockwaves through the medical and military communities. Dr. Wells's analysis of Bill's extracted device revealed that it had been in constant communication with a central monitoring system, transmitting data about not just Bill's physical condition, but his emotional states, social interactions, and even his thoughts and dreams through brainwave pattern analysis. "The scope of this surveillance is beyond anything the public could imagine," Dr. Wells explained to the packed press conference at Johns Hopkins. "For 50 years, these men have been living laboratories, their every moment monitored and analyzed, and the most disturbing part is that the system is still active, still collecting data on thousands of unsuspecting veterans." Emma stood beside her father's hospital bed, watching him process the magnitude of what had been done to him and his fellow veterans. Bill's recovery had been remarkable. Within 48 hours of the device's removal, he was walking without assistance, and his mental clarity had returned to levels he hadn't experienced since before Vietnam. "All those guys who couldn't adjust after the war," Bill said quietly. "All the suicides, the broken marriages, the ones who ended up homeless or addicted. What if it wasn't just PTSD? What if they were being manipulated too?" Sarah Williams had been working nonstop, coordinating with veteran advocacy groups to identify and locate the remaining Operation Lifeline subjects. The task was enormous. Many of the veterans were elderly, scattered across the country, and some had died without ever knowing they'd been part of an experiment. "We've identified 3,247 veterans who are still alive and potentially carrying devices," Sarah reported. "But here's the problem. The government is moving fast to suppress this story. They're claiming national security, invoking executive privilege, and they've gotten federal judges to issue gag orders on medical personnel." The legal battle was fierce. Within days of the story breaking, government lawyers had filed dozens of lawsuits attempting to prevent disclosure of classified information. They claimed that revealing details about Operation Lifeline would compromise ongoing national security operations and endanger American lives. But the veterans and their families weren't backing down. Led by Emma and Martha Henderson, they formed the Operation Lifeline Truth Alliance, demanding full disclosure and compensation for decades of medical experimentation. The group grew rapidly as more families came forward with stories of inexplicable pain, mysterious health problems, and suspicious deaths. Dr. Anthony Rossi, the surgeon who had live-streamed Bill's operation, became an unexpected hero when he announced he would perform free device removal surgeries for any veteran who requested it. "These men serve their country with honor," he declared. "The least we can do is free them from this technological torture." The government's response was swift and brutal. Federal agents raided Dr. Rossi's clinic, seizing medical equipment and patient records. They arrested Dr. Wells on charges of possessing classified military technology. Colonel Patterson, facing congressional hearings and criminal charges, went on national television to defend Operation Lifeline. "This was a legitimate medical research program designed to protect our soldiers," Patterson insisted, though his nervous demeanor suggested otherwise. These volunteers agreed to participate in experimental treatments that have saved countless lives. Emma watched the interview from her father's hospital room, her anger burning white-hot. Volunteers. Dad never volunteered for anything except to serve his country. Bill sat up straighter in his hospital bed, the strength returning to his voice. "You know what, Em? I think it's time I had my say." Against the advice of their lawyers, Bill Thompson agreed to testify before Congress. The hearing, broadcast live on every major network, became one of the most watched congressional proceedings in American history. Wearing his dress uniform for the first time in 50 years, Bill walked to the witness table without assistance, his back straight and his voice clear. "Senators, I served 3 tours in Vietnam because I believed in this country," Bill began, his words carrying the weight of 5 decades of pain. "I came home proud of my service, ready to build a life and raise a family. Instead, I spent 50 years as a government experiment, my body and mind manipulated without my knowledge or consent." The testimony was devastating. Bill described the chronic pain that had defined his existence, the emotional numbness that had destroyed his relationships, and the systematic medical gaslighting that had prevented him from getting proper treatment. When he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the chamber. Senator Warren, leading the investigation, asked the question everyone was thinking. "Mr. Thompson, what do you want from your government now?" Bill was quiet for a long moment, then looked directly into the cameras. "I want the truth. All of it. Every document, every file, every piece of data they collected about me and the other men they experimented on. And I want justice for the 847 veterans they murdered to keep this secret." The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Veterans organizations, human rights groups, and ordinary citizens demanded action. Protests outside the Pentagon continued for weeks. International allies pressured the United States to address what many were calling the worst human rights violation in American military history. Under mounting pressure, President Biden announced the formation of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to investigate Operation Lifeline and provide compensation to affected veterans and their families. The Pentagon was ordered to declassify all relevant documents and cooperate fully with the investigation. Dr. Wells was released from federal custody after public outcry reached a fever pitch. She immediately returned to her laboratory to continue analyzing the extracted devices and developing safe removal procedures. "We have a moral obligation to free these men from their technological prisons," she declared. Emma had taken a leave of absence from her nursing job to coordinate the growing movement for justice. Working 18-hour days, she helped identify and contact Operation Lifeline survivors, organized medical screenings, and coordinated with lawyers preparing the massive class action lawsuit against the government. "Mom would be proud of you," Bill told his daughter as they sat together in his hospital room one evening. "You're fighting for people who can't fight for themselves. I learned it from you, Dad. You never gave up even when the pain was unbearable." Bill smiled, the first genuine smile Emma had seen from him in decades. "I had help giving up, honey. They were making sure I couldn't think clearly enough to fight back, but now—" He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the protesters gathered below. "Now I feel like the man I was supposed to be." The breakthrough came when Dr. Wells discovered the central command system that had been controlling the devices. Hidden in a classified Pentagon facility, the system contained 50 years of data on every Operation Lifeline subject. The information was staggering. Detailed records of psychological manipulation, pain induction protocols, and behavioral modification experiments that violated every principle of medical ethics. Most shocking was the discovery that the program had never ended. Even as veterans aged and died, the data collection continued, with researchers studying the long-term effects of their experiments. They had been tracking not just the original subjects, but their children and grandchildren, looking for hereditary effects of the psychological manipulation. "They turned us into lab rats and then studied our families too," Bill said when he learned the full scope of the program. "3 generations of my family have been under surveillance." The final revelation came from an unexpected source. And Colonel Patterson, facing life in prison for war crimes, agreed to cooperate with investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony revealed that Operation Lifeline had been just one part of a larger program to develop technologies for controlling human behavior. The goal was to create the perfect soldier, Patterson admitted during his plea hearing. Someone who could be programmed to follow orders without question, who wouldn't suffer from combat stress or moral qualms about killing. "We thought we were advancing military science." "Instead, you were torturing American servicemen," the judge replied. As winter turned to spring, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission published its preliminary findings. The report documented systematic human experimentation on 12,000 veterans, 847 suspicious deaths, and a cover-up that had lasted over 50 years. The financial compensation alone was estimated at $50 billion, but the human cost was incalculable. For Bill Thompson, however, the most important outcome was simpler. For the first time in 50 years, he was free. Free from pain, free from the fog that had clouded his mind, and free to rebuild the relationships that had been damaged by forces beyond his control. "Dad," Emma said as they prepared to leave Johns Hopkins, "what do you want to do now?" Bill thought for a moment, then smiled. "I want to go home. I want to have Sunday dinner with Martha. I want to meet your kids properly, without pain clouding every interaction. And then I want to help find every one of those other 11,999 men and set them free, too." The battle for justice was far from over, but for the first time in 5 decades, Bill Thompson was ready to fight it as himself. Coming home to Minnesota felt like stepping into a different world. The trailer that had been Bill's prison for decades now seemed impossibly small and shabby. But Martha Henderson was waiting on the front porch with tears streaming down her weathered cheeks and a pot roast in the oven that smelled like forgiveness itself. "Billy Thompson, you look 20 years younger," she said, embracing him carefully before stepping back to study his face. "Harold would be so proud. We finally got the truth out." The transformation in Bill was remarkable to everyone who saw him. Gone was the hunched, pain-racked figure who had shuffled through life for 50 years. In his place stood a man Emma barely recognized, her father, as he was meant to be, clear-eyed and strong, moving through the world without the constant companion of agony that had defined his existence. "Dad, I keep expecting you to wince when you sit down or reach for pain pills or—" Emma shook her head, still adjusting to this new reality. "It's like meeting you for the first time." "In a way you are," Bill replied, settling into Martha's kitchen chair without the careful positioning that had been necessary for decades. "I'm finally myself again. The man I was before they put that thing in my back." The legal victories had come swiftly once the truth was exposed. The class action lawsuit resulted in the largest settlement in American legal history, $50 billion to be distributed among the 3,247 surviving Operation Lifeline subjects and the families of those who had died. More importantly, Congress had passed the Veterans Medical Freedom Act, guaranteeing informed consent for all medical procedures and establishing an independent oversight board for military medical research. Dr. Patricia Wells had become a national hero, traveling the country to perform free device removal surgeries for Operation Lifeline survivors. At 79, she worked with the energy of someone making up for decades of suppressed guilt. "Every device we remove is a life we give back," she told the media. "It's the least I can do to atone for my role in creating these instruments of torture." The numbers were staggering. Of the 3,247 surviving veterans, 2,891 still carried active devices. The removal surgeries had a 95% success rate, with most patients experiencing immediate relief from chronic pain and significant improvement in mental clarity and emotional well-being. The medical establishment was forced to confront the reality that thousands of patients they had dismissed as malingerers or psychosomatic cases had been genuine victims of technological torture. Emma had used her share of the settlement to establish the Thompson Foundation for Veteran Medical Rights, working to ensure that no American service member would ever again be subjected to non-consensual experimentation. The Foundation's first project was building a state-of-the-art treatment center in Minnesota, specifically designed to help Operation Lifeline survivors adjust to life without their devices. Some of these men have lived with artificial pain and emotional suppression for so long, they don't know how to function without it, Emma explained to the Foundation's board of directors. "We need to help them rediscover who they really are." Bill had become the unofficial spokesperson for Operation Lifeline survivors, traveling to congressional hearings and medical conferences to tell his story. His autobiography, 50 Years of Silence, had topped the bestseller lists for 12 weeks, with all proceeds donated to veteran support organizations. But the most important changes were personal. Bill's relationship with Emma had transformed completely. Free from the emotional numbness that had characterized their interactions for decades, he was finally able to be the father she had always needed. "I missed so much of your life," he said one evening as they sat on Martha's porch watching the sunset paint the Minnesota sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Your graduation, your wedding, the kids' birthdays. I was physically present but emotionally absent. That device stole our family from us. Dad, you're here now. That's what matters." Emma took his hand, marveling at how natural the gesture felt after years of careful distance. "And we have time to build something new." The reunion with his grandchildren had been particularly emotional. Jake, now 17, had driven up from Minneapolis with his younger sister Sophie, both nervous about meeting the grandfather they barely knew. Within hours, Bill was teaching Jake to fish in the same lake where he'd learned as a boy, and Sophie was curled up beside him listening to stories about his childhood that he'd never been able to share before. "Grandpa, were you really a spy?" Sophie asked, her 8-year-old imagination captivated by the media coverage of Operation Lifeline. "No, sweetheart. I was just a soldier who got used by people who forgot that soldiers are human beings, not laboratory equipment," Bill replied gently. "But the important thing is that we stopped them from hurting anyone else." Martha had moved into the guest room of the new house that Bill had built with his settlement money, A modest but comfortable home with a wraparound porch and a garden where she could grow the tomatoes that had sustained their friendship for decades. At 88, she had become the unofficial grandmother to Emma's children and the keeper of stories about Harold and the other men who hadn't lived to see justice. "Harold always said the truth would come out eventually," Martha reminded Bill one morning as they shared coffee and watched the sunrise. "He'd be so proud of what you've accomplished." The criminal trials had been swift and decisive. Colonel Patterson received a life sentence for war crimes and conspiracy. 17 other military officials were convicted of various charges related to Operation Lifeline. Most satisfying to Bill was the court's ruling that all benefits and pensions that had been stripped from whistleblowing veterans were to be restored with full back pay and interest. Dr. Wells had established a research foundation to study the long-term effects of the devices and develop better treatment protocols for survivors. Her work had revealed that the psychological manipulation had been even more extensive than originally believed. The devices had artificially suppressed empathy, emotional bonding, and even the ability to experience joy. The cruelest part wasn't the physical pain, Dr. Wells explained in her final report. It was stealing these men's capacity for happiness. They robbed them of 50 years of love, laughter, and human connection. Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after Emma had found her father collapsed on his kitchen floor, the Thompson family gathered for dinner in their new home. Bill carved the turkey with steady hands, his back straight and strong. Emma's children argued playfully over who got the drumsticks. Martha told stories about Christmases past that made everyone laugh. "You know what I'm most grateful for?" Bill said as they sat around the dinner table, candlelight reflecting off the snow outside. "Not just being free from pain, but being free to feel again. To love my family the way they deserve to be loved." Emma raised her glass of wine. "To Dad, who never gave up fighting. To Martha, who never stopped believing. And to all the veterans who can't be here tonight but whose sacrifice made this moment possible." As they toasted, Bill felt something he hadn't experienced in 50 years, complete, uncomplicated happiness. The device that had controlled his emotions for 5 decades was gone, and in its place was the simple joy of being surrounded by people he loved who loved him in return. Later that evening, as Emma helped Martha clear the dishes, the old woman pulled her aside. "Your father's a different man than the one I've known for 40 years, Martha said softly. "It's like watching someone come back from the dead." "In a way, he did," Emma replied. "We all did." Outside, snow began to fall again, but this time it felt like blessing rather than burden. Bill Thompson was finally, truly home, in his heart, in his family, and in his own skin. The 50-year nightmare was over, and the rest of his life could finally begin. Message for American seniors, 200 words. Imagine carrying a secret burden for 50 years. Chronic pain that doctors dismiss, emotional numbness that destroys relationships, a fog in your mind that you can't explain. Bill Thompson lived this reality because his own government betrayed him. But his daughter Emma refused to give up. Her love, determination, and refusal to accept "that's just old age" uncovered a conspiracy that changed everything. When that device was finally removed from Bill's spine, he got his life back. Real happiness, genuine connection with his family, and freedom from 5 decades of artificial suffering. This story isn't just about government conspiracy. It's about the power of family love to overcome any obstacle, the courage to fight for truth even when the system works against you, and the beautiful reality that it's never too late to reclaim your happiness. Every senior deserves to live without pain, to feel joy without shame, and to be believed when something isn't right. Your golden years should be exactly that. Golden. Have you ever felt dismissed by doctors or the medical system when you knew something was seriously wrong with your health? What would you do if you discovered a family member had been suffering unnecessarily for decades due to medical negligence or cover-up? Please share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Your story matters.